Yes. When writing a similarity statement, the order matters. So we need to keep the order consistent. So looking at the big triangle, when naming it, we can start with the hypotenuse and then just go to the small legs. So we can call this triangle DBA. DBA. So DBA is going to be similar to, now let's look at the medium-sized triangle. So we start at the hypotenuse and then go to the small leg. So what would we call this one? DAC. We're starting at the hypotenuse and then going to the small leg. And then last, we have triangle, the little one. So if we start at the hypotenuse and then go to the small leg, what would we call this one?
DAC.
We're starting at the hypotenuse here. ABC.
ABC. Wait, but then why did you call the other one?
What was that one?
DBA. The quiz is multiple choice. So if the first one, let's say it goes from the small leg to the big leg, just remember you have to keep that order. So then you're going to go from the small leg to the big leg on every single one. So the order is important. Number 2, find the geometric mean of 4 and 10. How do we find the geometric mean?
4 over x equals x over 10.
Right, so we take the square root of 4 times 10. So we can multiply 4 times 10 and get 40, or just leave it like that. And just find the factors of 4 and 10. So 4, the factors are 2 and 2. 10, we have 2 and 5. Do we have any pairs?
Yes.
What do we do with our pair? Put it on the outside. So we have 2 square root. What are we left with on the inside? 2 times 5, which is 10. Okay, number 3. We're going to do the same thing for 14 and 18. So we have the square root of 14 times 18. What are factors of 14?
2 and 7.
What are factors of 18? 2 and 9. So we have 7, 2, 2. And what are factors of 9? 3 and 3. So what pairs do we have? A pair of 2s and a pair of 3s. So what goes on the outside? 2 times 3. And what are we left with on the inside? So we have 6 square root 7 as our final answer. All right, for number 4, we need to find x, y, and z. So what are 2 formulas here when we have the 3 triangles in one? So we have segment 1 over altitude is equal to altitude over segment 2. Another way we can write this formula is altitude squared is equal to segment 1 times segment 2. These are the same thing.
Is it segment 1 times segment 2?
Yep. So you guys need to know this formula for tomorrow. Which one do you like better, the proportion one or the equation? This one? So it's just personal preference, whatever you prefer. So first let's find x. So what is our altitude here? 7. So remember, the altitude is always the line that goes down the middle of the triangle. So we have 7 squared is equal to segment 1 times segment 2. So what's segment 1? And what's segment 2? 8. So it's important that you know what parts of the triangle are. So we have the altitude. This is our segment 1, and this is our segment 2. The number of segment 1 or segment 2 doesn't matter. You can say that X is segment 1 and Y is segment, and 8 is segment 2. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So now we have 7 squared is equal to X times 8. What's 7 squared?
49.
So 49 is equal to 8x. We can divide by 8. And what do you guys get for x? Put it in your calculator. So 6.125, which we can round to 6.13.
Can you just use a fraction?
It'll be easier to use a decimal, but also on the quiz, just look and see what the answers are left in. If it's a fraction, then you can just leave it as a fraction.
So I'm saying if you're just doing
Okay, so we found x, which is 6.13. So now we need our second formula to help us find the legs. So the next one is hypotenuse over leg is equal to leg over the SOHAL. So remember, the SOHAL is the segment that is adjacent to the leg that we're talking about. The segment of the hypotenuse that's adjacent to the leg.
What is the first? Oh.
so where's this so home?
So if we're talking about segment Y, the SOHAL would be this 6.13. If we're talking about leg Y, the SOHAL would be 6.13. So the segment that's right next to the leg that we're looking at. So if we put this fraction, this proportion, into an equation form, it would be leg squared is equal to the hypotenuse times the SOHAL. So you guys need to remember this equation too, this formula. So the two important formulas are this one and the altitude one. So for this one, the leg and the hypotenuse are all talking about the big triangle. So we need the hypotenuse of the big triangle and the legs of the big triangle. So let's find y first. So our leg is y, so we have y squared is equal to the hypotenuse, which would be,
14.
perfect, the hypotenuse is this whole thing, so we just add 8 and 6.13, so we get 14.13. So the hypotenuse is the hypotenuse of the big triangle, which we have the two segments of it, so we just add them together to find what the whole thing is. So we have 14.13, and then we multiply that times the segment of the hypotenuse adjacent to the leg, which is 6.13. So now we need to do 14.13 times 6.13 and then take the square root of that.
So it's 86.6. What would we just?
And then you need to take the square root of that. So you get 86.6. And then you take the square root.
Nine.
9.3. So now we're going to do the same thing to find z. So we're using this formula again. We have the leg squared is equal to the hypotenuse times the SOHAL. So now we're looking at leg z. So z squared is equal to, what's our hypotenuse? 14.13. And that's going to be times, what's our SOHAL? 8. So we're going to do 14.13 times 8, and then take the square root of that.
The multiplier is 113.04.
So z squared is 113.04, but we need to find just z, so we have to take the square root of both sides. 10.6. Perfect.
Ms. Carter,
Mhm.
figure out which one is the so-called.
So the SOHAL is different depending on which leg you're looking at. So if we have our triangle, if we're working with leg Y, so we're trying to find Y, the segment that's adjacent to it is the SOHAL. So this 6.13 is what our SOHAL will be in the equation. If we're trying to find Z, the segment that's closest to it, which is 8, is our SOHAL in the equation. Okay?
So, if you're finding out why.
Okay, any questions on this page? Ready for the next one? Number 5, find x. So x is talking about this whole hypotenuse of our big triangle. We have the altitude and we have one segment. What do you think we need to do here? Segment. So to find the other segment, let's call that segment y.
It's like the
So altitude squared is equal to segment 1 times segment 2. So what's our altitude? 9. So we have 9 squared is equal to, what's segment 1?
2.
And segment 2?
Y.
Y. So we have 81 is equal to 2y. We just divide by 2. And what do we get for y? 40.5. But we need to find x, so we have to add 40.5 and 2. So for x, we get what? 42.5. So remember, this formula you have to know. Very important. Okay, now we're moving on to 8.2. So write the trig ratio for sine x. So we're using this triangle to the right. What is sine? What's the acronym that we need to remember? SOHCAHTOA. So sine, we have opposite over hypotenuse. So if we're looking at angle x, the sine of x is going to be the opposite. So 20 over the hypotenuse, which is 25. Perfect. On the quiz, I don't know if this is going to be in decimal or like a simplified fraction, but how do we simplify 20 over 25? Divide by 5, so we get 4 over 5. And then you could just put 4 over 5 on your calculator and get the decimal if the question had all the answers in decimal form. So you just got to see what the answers are in. Because remember, it's multiple choice.
So for the so and SOHCAHTOA, is that like sine over hypotenuse?
Yes, so its sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse.
Wait, all of it is a multiple choice?
What,
All of it.
Isn't the hypotenuse the longest?
So the hypotenuse is going to be the longest one, which is 25.
Oh,
Okay, let's find the cosine of x. So cosine is what? Adjacent over hypotenuse. So if we take the cosine of x, what's adjacent to x? 15. And what's our hypotenuse? How do we simplify 15 over 25? 3 over 5. Okay, next we have the tangent of x. So what is tangent? Opposite over adjacent. So what is opposite of angle X? 20. And what is adjacent? 15. How do we simplify 20 over 15? 4 over 3. Perfect. So these were just looking at the triangle. You need to remember SOHCAHTOA. Very important.
I got you.
All right, for the next 3, all you're doing is putting it in your calculator. So you just put the sine of 36 in your calculator. This is the time to figure out when to use your calculator. Make sure you know how to use it for your quiz. I'm not going to go around tomorrow and check to see if you're doing it right.
What decimal do you want it?
2 decimals.
So with the first
0.59
0.59 because we round it. Remember on the quiz, it's multiple choice, so just got to see what.
So, why would we, if we, like, let's say we don't have a scientific calculator, but the phone does?
You cannot use your phone or iPad for the quiz. Okay, so you need a calculator. You need a calculator that has sine, cosine, and tangent. What about the tan of 42? So 0.90. Everybody agrees?
Yep.
And what about the cosine of 64? 0.44. Is everyone good with this page? All right, last page. Yay. So we need to find BC. So let's call BC X. Looking at the angle that's given to us, 42, angle C, we have the opposite and we have the hypotenuse. So we have the opposite and we have the hypotenuse. In our SOHCAHTOA, which one involves the opposite and the hypotenuse? Sine, the SO. So we're going to take the sine of 42. And it's going to be what? Sine is
0.67.
opposite over hypotenuse, so 18 over x. To get this to be x equals, we just multiply both sides by x. So we get x times sine of 42 is equal to 18. And then we just divide by sine. So we're just moving the equation around to get x equals. That way we can just put it into our calculator. So it cancels out. X is equal to 18 over sine of 42.
26.9. I think. Did I do it right?
So you're going to put this into your calculator. And what do we get for BC? 26.9.
Well, how do you put that in the calculator? It's just 18.
So depending on what type of calculator you have, in the one that I use, I'll do the sine of 42, find out what that is, and then you just do 18 divided by that number. Okay, 13 we're going to skip. If you want to do it for fun, you can.
Are we
Do we want to do that on the?
You will not have a question like that.
Okay.
So let's go to 14. So now we're looking for the measure of angle A. What's that button on the calculator we need to click when we're looking for the measure?
First sentence and then.
So the inverse. So we do either sine of -1, cosine -1, or tan -1. In this problem, all 3 side lengths are given, so we could do sine, cosine, or tangent, whichever we prefer. So which one do you guys want to use? Let's do tangent. So if we do the tangent, -1 of, what's tangent?
Opposite over adjacent.
Opposite over adjacent. So what's opposite?
48.
And what's adjacent? So in your calculator, if you do 48 over 55,
41.1.
and then take the tangent of that, and we get
41.1.
41 degrees. I just rounded it.
So you did tan -1.
So I did tan -1 of the opposite over adjacent. What happens if we do sine -1 of what's sine?
Opposite over hypotenuse.
So what's the opposite?
48.
And the hypotenuse? So if we do the sine of 48 over 73, what do we get?
That's in degrees, right?
Yes.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
You get 40. Yeah, you get.
Same thing. So it doesn't matter which one we use. We can use sine, cosine, or tangent. We'll always get the same thing.
Just for the measures or something?
Yes. So remember, when you're finding the angle, you're going to use the inverse.
So you could use it.
Yeah. If it gives you all three of these,
Well, how do you know whether or not to use -1?
so when you're finding the angle degree,
So it's always going to be negative.
you're going to use these.
But it's always going to be -1 that you have to.
Yeah, there's a button on the calculator that has like that tan -1.
Oh,
It's a button. So you're not going to do like multiplying by negative. It's a button that you click. Yes. 26.9.